All right, so welcome to the session, an introduction to SQL Server. This is part of a full course on querying SQL Server, and it is basically focused on T-SQL. This first module is going to be like an overview of SQL Server as a platform, and I'm going to switch between these slides and the practical sessions using SQL Server Management Studio. So let's just get deep into it. Now, this is a little about me. I have experience in SQL Server as well as Oracle and some other things. And I'm reachable online. If you Google Kenneth Igiri, you'll see me all over the place. So I don't need to go through this in detail. Then, history of SQL Server. This aspect, I feel, is an aspect that you can easily read up on the internet. So I won't spend too much time on it. But suffice it to say that the current version of SQL, this is a little dated, is actually 2019. Yes, and previously before then we had the 2017, and each version of SQL Server comes with its new features basically, and you're able to leverage those new features. It's sometimes important to know what version you are working with and what features are available in that version. Typically, if I wanted to find out what version I am working on, I'll just do this statement. Select at 7a. Sorry, this is 7a. I'll do select at version. So if I was in a new environment and I wanted to know what version is running, there are many ways to do it, of course, but this is a straightforward way to see exactly what you're working on. This is SQL Server 2019 RTM, and I think it's in the next slide. I'll show you what these mean.
Yeah.
So RTM basically means that this version of SQL Server is the base version. There's no patch on it. Let me pause a little bit. But I'm recording the session, so I have to I'm capturing all the sounds. All right, can I continue? Prince? All right, so basically, I'm sure he's muted himself. All right, basically, if I wanted to find out what version of SQL this is, I do that with this tool, select at version, and it tells me that my version is 2019 RTM. RTM means, I forgot the full meaning, but it basically means that this is the base version for this the first release of this version of SQL Server. You can see the details of these versions on some websites like SQL Server updates, if I'm not mistaken, .com. I'll just show it to you quickly. 1 minute. Then there's another one, SQL Server builds.blogspot.com. I'm going to display it right now. My internet is also giving a little bit of issues. All right, so this is a website called sqlserverupdates.com. So it gives you all the list of SQL Server versions that are currently available. This is the current build 18.5, the latest update for the current build. This is version 2019. These are the updates that are available for 2019, 2017, 2016, and so on and so forth. This is the most recent. Now, there's another environment I like, that the website I like to use. This is SQL Server builds.blogspot.com. Of course, you can get this information on the Microsoft site as well, but these sites make it easy for you to see. I use this one a lot. So this tells you that this is the latest release. This release has no service pack. SP stands for service pack, and this is the latest cumulative update. Service packs actually stopped in SQL Server 2017, if I remember well, and this is the latest cumulative update 4 for SQL Server 2019. So in our environment, we are using SQL Server 2017, the base version. If you go down this site, okay, first of all, RTM means release to manufacturing. So that is that's what we have. Remember on our that we're going to be playing with today. The release to manufacturing version. That means that there's no service pack on it and there's no cumulative update on it. It's just a basic install of the first release of SQL Server 2017. If you go down on this site, you will see more details about all the cumulative updates that were released for SQL Server 2019 up till the latest one. You also see the build numbers. You see that the build number for SQL Server 2019 is 15.0.2000.5. If you go down to 2017, it also has a build number 14. So and so. So for each release, for each patch they release, each cumulative update, there's a new build number, a new file version, and so on and so forth. You can get all that information here on SQL Server builds.blogspot.com. So let's get back here. So our version is 2019 RTM, so we don't have any of the cumulative updates installed. Let's go back to our slides. So this history keeps getting updated as new releases of or as Microsoft gives us new releases of SQL Server. Now editions, this is another concept which we find in SQL Server. Editions, basically what they group each version of SQL Server into what is called editions. Now what it means is that there are variants of that particular version depending on the functionality that is available or the complexity of the functionalities available, the number of functionalities available, and the degree to which those functionalities can serve organizations. For example, if you want to look at the Express edition, if you have an Express edition, you have limitations. For example, you cannot have a database that is larger than 10 gig. You cannot have high availability. Express editions are typically for your personal work, your personal practice. You have the Developer edition, which is for you to do development work in an enterprise, but it's not for you to use for commercial purposes. It's not for production. We also used to have the web version and the standard and the enterprise. Most large organizations like ours, we use enterprise edition because enterprise edition offers you the complete set of capabilities in everything in HA, everything in DR, everything in performance, all the limits, the maximum limits of SQL Server is it's fully available in an enterprise edition. The standard editions have certain limitations. In Microsoft documentation, you will see the specifics of what the limitations are for each of the editions. Then one of the key concepts that when you start working with SQL Server, especially if you work with other other database platforms, is the concept of an instance when compared to a database, and so on and so forth. So in a typical, let me pin this so that we can see well. In a typical SQL Server installation, the relationship between an instance and databases is what you call a one-to-many relationship. That means you can have many databases in one instance. I have another instance here. I'll just start it up and then we'll see what we're talking about. Yes. Let me see. I'll just start it up, and so we'll see that we'll have two instances, and in each of those instances we can have many databases within them. Now, an instance can be either a named instance or a default instance. When an instance is a default instance, you discover that it takes the name of the host. It takes the name of the host, and it takes the default port of 1433. port numbers, the listening port number in SQL Server can be changed, but the default port number is 1433. When, and you have that is a static port. When you have what do you call it, I have an Express edition here, and it's typically installed as a named instance. When you have a named instance, the port number is dynamic. That means that it changes. It basically takes up a port number every time you restart the instance. Every time you restart the instance, it takes up a port number. So you have to make sure.
Hello, Ken.
Yes, please.
Hello.
Hello.
So
here.
please, if it's just like DHCP,
something like that.
like the way.
Yeah, it's something like DHCP, dynamic. So I'll show you where it is recorded. Just give me a minute. Let me just try to log into this one.
Okay.
Yes, so I'll show you the details of the port configuration, but you have to understand that whenever you install a named instance, by default, the port number is dynamic. So there was an experience I had some years ago when around 2013, 2014. Some people were troubleshooting after doing a port opening. They were troubleshooting why it wasn't going through. They were there for hours until I got into the call, and when I looked at the instance, I realized the instance is a named instance. And when you install named instances next, by default, the port number is not 1433. It is a dynamic port. So you have to find out which exact port is it using at that time for you to know which port you need to open and how to troubleshoot any communication issues. But back to what I was saying, I'll come back to that. I was saying that you can have here, in this case, we have 2 instances. And then in each instance, we have, multiple databases. And the databases are typically of 2 types. You have the system databases and the user databases. Now, the system databases come predefined, pre-installed with SQL Server. And every time you install an instance of SQL Server, it comes with they have their functions, and we'll go over them in the course in this course. Let's go back a little to the issue of port numbers. Now, if I go to my SQL Server Configuration Manager, I am going to see that I have all my instances installed here. This is what will really tell you which instances are available. It is possible that if this instance is down, I may find out that I'm not able to log into it. But for me to really be sure whether that instance exists on the server, I have to come to SQL Server Configuration Manager or maybe Services. Then when I come here, I can see a lot of detail about this instance. For example, let me show you something about this instance which is important. When I go to the properties of the instance, I think that properties has come this way. If I go to properties of the instance, where are you? Sorry about that. Let me just come back. Yes, I can find out the account name that is used to run this instance. I can find out the service details. What's the start mode? Is it manual? I set this to manual on my machine because I don't want it to start every time I start my desktop because I don't want it to take up resources unnecessarily. Then this is a binary path. That means the path where SQL Server is installed, and you can use this command to actually start SQL Server. Then you have the state, whether it is running or not. You have a file stream configuration, which is another a feature of SQL Server that is not what we are focused on now. You have the always on availability groups pane, where you configure always on if you are setting it up for the first time. This is where you enable always on. And then startup parameter. This is very important. One of the things that is important about this is that it tells you where the master data file is located. Whenever you start an instance of SQL Server, it must go and look for this master data file, because the master database, recall that we were looking at this earlier, the master database is the first database that must start when you start SQL Server. Is the first. The external program that brings up the engine must know where that data file is. And it is this parameter that tells it where that data file is. There's also the error log parameter. It must know where the error log is sitting because it must start writing to the error log from the point at which you start the instance. And it must also know where the master log file is. Later on, we'll talk a little bit more about data files and log files. Essentially, when you say a database, you're saying it's a collection of data files. That's all you're saying. Like you are seeing now that databases, as far as SQL Server is concerned, databases sit inside instances. Databases sit inside instances. So you can have many databases inside one instance of SQL Server. Okay, so I wanted to show you that. These are one key startup parameters. What else is here? These are more details, more parameters, set up by default typically with SQL Server. So it gives you an overview. All these, a number of these parameters can be configurable, like log pages in memory, instance file initialization, and so on and so forth. Instant file initialization, well, that's a whole new topic, but it basically means that when you tell SQL Server to create a data file, it doesn't try, it can do it much faster. It doesn't try to zero out the blocks on the OS level first. It just acquires that block of storage and creates a data file out of it. And you typically need certain privileges to the SQL Server service account for that to work. You have something called log pages in memory. This gives SQL Server the power to take memory from the operating system and retain it within itself and only release it when the database really needs it. You need this configuration when you're setting the limits for SQL Server memory usage. Okay, so those are some of the things that you see here. So let's come back. So like I said, when you start up the instance of SQL Server, it must know where the master database is. Now, the master now in turn knows where every other thing is. The master will now open the tempdb. The master has a record of where the tempdb data files are. That's what you see in something called select star from sys.master files. Yeah. So anytime you see sys.this is most of the time these are what you call catalog views or catalog system views that give you information or metadata information about the entire instance. So the master database, you see this sys.master files actually is sitting in the master database. This is a catalog view, if I'm not mistaken, that sits inside the master database. If you want to see all the catalog views and tables that are in the master database, it's as simple as extracting this. And a lot of them are, they are, what do you call it, intuitive in their naming. For example, if you see sys.availability replicas, that will tell you that this view, this is a view, right? This is a view, will give you information about the availability replicas in an availability configuration. If you say sys.database files, this will give you information about the database files. You say, oh, sys.databases, this will give you information about the, and so on and so forth. So the master has a collection of system objects of dynamic management views, catalog views, and all that are able to give you a complete description and information about the entire instance. That's where all that is stored. That's why the master must start first. And then the master goes to look for where the temp is and all other things while it is starting up. It must start first. And for it to start first, the configuration, the installation of SQL or the SQL engine must know where the master data files are. So that is very important. So once it starts, it can now start opening all the databases that are on that instance. So let me show you something in the log. Let's go to the log for, let's close this instance. Go to the log for the main instance we have, the default instance we have, SQL Server logs, sorry, current. So let's see what happened when I first started this instance. Okay. Eben, are you there?
Yes, sir. I'm following.
We're together, right? Okay. All right. So let's look at this. Yeah. This is all the things that happened when I started this instance. First of all, it reads the configuration details of the instance. UTC adjustment sets the time and so on. All this is part of this first entry. Then it acquires a process ID. Now, what is the process ID? If we go to services, or if we can get it from task manager. We can get it from task manager. If you come here, if you go to details, right? Yeah. Yes, I have a column for PID here. If I have a problem with SQL Server that denies me all other ways of terminating the instance, I can come here, identify. Can you see that it's the same number? I can identify the process ID on the operating system level, and I can terminate it. You get, so this tells you the process ID that was acquired from the operating system when this instance of SQL started. So that's another an important thing. Then it tells you where the environment where it's sitting. It tells you what the authentication mode is. It is reading all this, is preparing itself to start up. You see that it has opened the error log. So it tells you, remember that there's a configuration entry that tells it where the error log is. That open the error log, starts writing to it. It tells you who the service account is. It now starts reading the configuration, the startup parameters, and uses those startup parameters to open the master database and so on and so forth. And then it determines what are the resources that are available to it. It knows, okay, I have one CPU socket with two cores of CPU, and it also knows how much memory it has. What else is this? Yes, it has 12 gig of RAM, and allocate some buffer pool. This is where all the calculations take place. It's like a scratch pad for the instance, where you have things like it will temporarily store queries and all that. So you have to acquire that from memory, determine when SQL Server takes up memory from the OS, it has to compartmentalize it internally to know where am I going to put my buffer pool, where am I going to put this aspect of memory. There are many aspects of memory, and typically they are recorded in what you call memory clerks inside SQL Server. Then query store settings, and so on and so on. So a lot of things are going on here as it starts up. It just basically sets up itself, defines the environment that it's in, tells you some of the key parameters that are on, resource governor, the port number that is listening. Okay, let's talk about this port. This is UDP 1434. This is not TCP. This is UDP 1434. The purpose of this port number is for it to advertise the instance, basically. So when somebody wants to come into this server to find out, is there any instance of SQL Server on this server, it will scan port UDP 1434. That is why when we go to an environment like the cardholder environment, PCI DSS requires that we disable this capability. How do we disable it? We disable it by shutting the SQL Server browser down. So we disable the browser. That's what we do, so that it will not advertise the instance. It's a security measure to make sure that you're not advertising your instance. So this 1434 defined as UDP 1434 for advertising the instance, allowing you to be able to scan the server and know whether there's an instance of SQL Server there.
Quick question. Does it mean that on Postilion, the SQL Server browser does not run on the services?
Yes, precisely. So that's what it's supposed to be. Yes, you're correct. except somebody has
Oh,
changed it. So it's not expected to be running inside a cardholder environment. Okay. All right. So another thing that happens here is, okay, it sets up what you call a service principal name. So it has to register an entry in the domain, that defines, you can see more details of this here, that defines the this whole service principal name is a whole new topic on its own inside in Windows, but it has to register itself a service principal name on the domain where it is sitting. What else? Then it starts opening all the databases. Look at this database. It's called my MS SQL System Resource. It is a hidden database. You don't see it when you look at it here. That is why sometimes when you don't see it here at all. You don't see that MySQL System resource database. You don't see it. That is why when they ask you how many system databases do you have in SQL, they're actually 5. They are not 4. I think some people even say 6. They're actually 5 system databases typically. Then it starting up this user databases. The engine can do this because it's reading all the information from the master, which has already been opened. So they are all starting up. And then redo. What redo means is that the last time these databases went down, they went down abruptly. So SQL Server will read the transaction log and use the information there to bring all the databases to a consistent state before finally opening them. Yes, before finally opening up all the databases, and the databases will now be available. That is why sometimes when you have a very large database and it shuts down abruptly, it takes a long time to come up because all this redo and undo has to happen. This is another topic, recovery has to happen before the database eventually comes up. So what you typically in that case, just watch to see that it's progressing. If it is progressing, the wisest thing to do is to allow it complete the recovery and open up. So that is that. What else are we saying here? All right. So I will just glance through the error log to tell us what happens when you open up, we start up SQL Server, and this is all based on the concept of instances and what? Databases. So in SQL Server, databases sit inside instances. In SQL Server, you can have up to 50 instances on a single server. Up to 50 instances on a single server. If it's a clustered server, you can have up to 25 instances. The first instance you install is called a default instance, and all others are named instances. All the other named instances, you can they will by default pick up a dynamic port number. Yes, I was going to show you that where that is defined. They'll pick up a dynamic port number, but you can change the port number and determine what you want it to listen on. All right, so SQL Server network protocols for SQL Server, this TCP IP properties. Yes, so this tells you which port number the instance is listening on. This is the TCP port, which is the static port in this case. In the other instance, let's look at it. This is a, let's see if I'm not changing it, is a dynamic port. When you say dynamic port, you see 0 here. That means every time you start it up, it will pick up another port number. So let us see what is this port number that it is using right now.